Today was one of those days full of really stark contradictions. On one hand, we saw a truly historic truce take hold in one part of the world. But on the other, old rivalries just seemed to flare right back up. So we're going to break down this global push and pull and try to figure out what it all means for tomorrow.
And you really have to start with this powerful statement from US President Donald Trump, who called today a historic day. So what was he talking about? Well, it all goes back to a massive, and I mean massive, diplomatic development in the Middle East. And a breakthrough it was. We're talking about a major de-escalation of conflict involving Israel, Lebanon, and by extension, Iran. It all centered on two absolutely critical points of tension that frankly just got a lot less tense.
Okay, so first up, a 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanon officially kicked in. Now, what makes this so incredibly significant is who was involved. I mean, this wasn't some low-level agreement. This was brokered directly in Washington with President Trump, Lebanese President Aoun, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu all at the table. That's the big leagues. But that ceasefire, as huge as it is, was really just the first domino to fall. It actually triggered an even bigger piece of news, something with massive global implications. And the change here is just dramatic. The Strait of Hormuz, that choke point where about a fifth of the world's oil flows through, is reopening. Iran's foreign minister announced that as long as the ceasefire holds, commercial traffic can resume. So we're going from a complete blockade to a coordinated passage. Now there's a catch. Vessels will still need permission from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But still, for global trade, this is a monumental development.
And you know what happens when news that big drops, right? The markets react, and they react fast. So let's take a look at the immediate economic ripple effect. Within just a few hours, the Dow Jones Industrial Average shot up by over 1,000 points. That is pure relief from the financial markets. It was a direct bet that opening up that crucial waterway would bring some much-needed stability to the global economy. And on the flip side of that coin, crude oil prices dropped below $90 a barrel for the first time in months. It makes perfect sense, right? With the world's most important oil lane reopening, all those fears of a supply crisis just evaporated, and the price fell. It's a perfect example of how geopolitics can directly affect your wallet. So we've got a major truce, open shipping lanes, soaring markets. It all sounds pretty fantastic, doesn't it? But we have to ask the question, was every part of the world moving in this same peaceful direction? And the answer, well, unfortunately, is a pretty clear no. It's almost like while one fire was being dampened down in the Middle East, another one was flaring up between long-standing allies. It just goes to show you that even on a historic day, old tensions can very easily spark new conflicts.
And in this case, we're talking about relations between the US and Italy, which took a really sharp nosedive. President Trump actually threatened to pull defense support for Italy. This was a direct response to criticism from Italian Prime Minister Meloni. And the core of this whole dispute seems to be linked to Pope Leo's very vocal opposition to the conflict with Iran. It's created this complex web where Meloni is kind of caught between a key military ally on one side and a really powerful voice back home on the other. And beyond those two huge stories, the world's gears just kept on turning. While the headlines were all about truces and threats, there were a dozen other smaller but still important shifts happening all at the same time. It really paints a picture of a world that is just in constant motion. So, over in Europe, economic pressures were definitely building. New data showed that Eurozone inflation hit 2.6% in March, which was higher than analysts were expecting. And what's driving it? Primarily a huge 7% jump in energy costs in just 1 month. That's a really worrying sign for consumers and, for sure, a big headache for central bankers. Here's a really notable financial development. The International Monetary Fund, the organization that works to stabilize the global economy, it resumed its dealings with Venezuela. Now, this is a major shift because it comes after a 6-year suspension. It's happening under the country's new acting president, and it signals a potential, a cautious but potential opening for its economy. For anybody who travels in the U.S., this number is a big deal. 2,708. That is the new reduced cap on daily flights at Chicago O'Hare. It's a pretty drastic measure, but it's meant to finally combat the chronic delays that have plagued one of the world's busiest airports. So yeah, it means fewer flight options, but hopefully it also means fewer cancellations. Back in Washington, a major deadline was just narrowly avoided.
The House passed a last-minute extension of the pretty controversial Section 702 spy powers. That's the one that allows for warrantless surveillance of foreigners abroad. But really, this is just kicking the can down the road. It sets up another really intense debate before that new April 30th deadline.
Meanwhile, in Asia, we saw two very different but significant developments. On the political front, Myanmar's ousted president was released from prison as part of a New Year's amnesty. And on the economic front, kind of connecting back to our main story, a South Korean tanker successfully navigated a totally new Red Sea route, a direct and pretty creative response to all those recent shipping disruptions.
Here's a move aimed at tackling both period poverty and environmental waste. France announced a really progressive new healthcare policy. The government is now going to reimburse the cost of reusable menstrual products for anyone under 26 and for low-income individuals as well. And finally, in what could be a huge paradigm shift for veterans' healthcare, the Trump administration signaled it's exploring some very new options. The White House is apparently drafting an executive order to increase research into the psychedelic drug ibogaine as a potential treatment for PTSD.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We saw a historic truce in the Middle East that totally calmed down global markets. But at the exact same time, we saw major allies sparring over policy and a dozen other complex shifts happening on everything from energy and travel to health, all across the globe.
Which really leaves us with this one final question. We've seen these fragile truces and these fresh tensions emerging side by side. So, does a day like this actually represent a genuine turning point for global affairs? Or is this chaotic mix of good news and bad news simply the new normal? You know, just another Tuesday in our really complex world. It's definitely something to think about.